Picture two Americans sitting at the same kitchen table in early 2009. They live in the same neighborhood. They wake up to the same alarming headlines. Every television channel seems to be reporting another disaster. Banks are failing. Home prices are falling. Companies are laying off workers. Experts are openly debating whether the United States is heading toward another Great Depression. Both families have worked hard for years. They have savings. They have retirement accounts. They have dreams of a comfortable future. But suddenly, everything feels uncertain. The first family looks at the situation and thinks, we can't afford to lose anything else. They move their money into cash. They stop contributing to their retirement accounts. They decide to wait until the economy feels safe again. The second family experiences the exact same fear. Their retirement account is also losing value. They're also worried about paying bills. They also wonder whether things could become even worse. But instead of asking, how do we avoid today's fear? They ask, what if today's fear is creating tomorrow's opportunity? Neither family knows what will happen next. Neither family can predict the future. But over the following decade, those two decisions lead to two completely different financial lives. History would later show that one of them had unknowingly positioned themselves during one of the greatest wealth-building periods in modern American history. And that raises an important question. Why do ordinary Americans repeatedly miss the biggest financial opportunities of their generation? Because this wasn't the first time it happened. And it probably won't be the last. The strange thing about wealth creation is that it rarely feels exciting while it's happening. It usually feels uncomfortable. It feels uncertain. It feels risky. And that is exactly why so few people recognize it. To understand why, we have to go back to one of the darkest financial moments the United States has ever experienced. The year was 2008. For years before the crisis, the American economy appeared incredibly strong. Home prices kept climbing. Banks were lending money at record levels. Buying a house seemed like one of the safest financial decisions anyone could make. Many Americans believed housing prices could only move in one direction, up. But beneath the surface, the system had begun to crack. Banks were approving mortgages for borrowers who often couldn't afford them. Many loans carried low introductory payments that later increased dramatically. Those mortgages were bundled together and sold throughout the financial system as investments. As long as housing prices continued rising, very few people questioned the risk. But financial bubbles often share one dangerous characteristic. They convince people that the good times will last forever. Then reality arrives. When home prices began falling, millions of homeowners suddenly owed more on their mortgages than their homes were worth. Mortgage payments were missed. Foreclosures increased. Financial institutions that had invested heavily in mortgage-related assets began suffering enormous losses. Then came one of the defining moments of the crisis. In September 2008, Lehman Brothers, one of America's largest investment banks, filed for bankruptcy. The collapse shook confidence across the entire financial system. Credit markets froze. Businesses struggled to borrow money. Consumers reduced spending. Employers began cutting jobs. Fear spread much faster than facts. And when fear spreads through financial markets, prices often fall much faster than the true value of businesses. By March 2009, the S&P 500 had fallen by more than 50% from its previous high. Retirement accounts that Americans had spent decades building suddenly looked devastated. Imagine checking your retirement savings after years of careful investing, only to discover that a large portion of it had disappeared on paper. For many families, this wasn't just a financial event. It felt deeply personal. Dreams of retirement suddenly looked uncertain. College savings appeared threatened. Financial security felt like it was slipping away. This is where psychology begins to overpower logic. Behavioral economists have long studied something called loss aversion. It's the idea that the pain of losing money is much stronger than the happiness of gaining the same amount. Losing $10,000 usually feels far worse than earning an extra $10,000 feels good. That emotional imbalance changes how people make decisions. Instead of asking, what investment makes the most sense over the next 20 years? People begin asking, how do I stop today's pain? The difference may sound small, but it completely changes behavior. Selling investments suddenly feels like relief. Holding cash feels safe. Waiting feels responsible. Yet history has repeatedly shown that emotional comfort and long-term wealth are often moving in opposite directions. And this is what makes major financial opportunities so difficult to recognize. They rarely appear when people feel confident. They appear when confidence has almost disappeared. There is another psychological force working against investors during moments like these. It is called herd behavior. Human beings naturally look to other people when uncertainty increases. If everyone around us is selling, if every headline predicts disaster, if friends, coworkers, and even financial experts sound terrified, doing the opposite can feel almost impossible, because standing alone feels dangerous. But markets have an unusual way of rewarding independent thinking, not reckless thinking, not blind optimism, but disciplined decisions based on long-term evidence instead of short-term emotion. And this is exactly where the two families from our opening story begin to separate. One family allows fear to make every financial decision. The other family acknowledges the fear, but refuses to let fear make the decision for them. Neither family realizes it at the time, but one of them is quietly positioning themselves for one of the most extraordinary recoveries in American financial history. The surprising part is that they don't need perfect timing. They don't need insider information. They don't even need to know where the market bottom is. They simply need to keep doing something that feels incredibly difficult during moments of uncertainty. They need to keep believing that America's economy has recovered before, and that it can recover again. Because what happened after 2009 would surprise almost everyone who believed the financial story was over. In reality, it was only just beginning. What happened next became one of the greatest demonstrations of how patience can outperform prediction. Looking back today, it's easy to say the recovery was obvious, but nothing about it felt obvious in 2009. The headlines were still negative. Unemployment remained painfully high. Thousands of businesses were struggling. Many Americans believed the market would continue falling for years. Some even argued that investing in stocks had become too dangerous. But while fear dominated the news, something much quieter was happening beneath the surface. American businesses were adapting. Companies were cutting unnecessary costs. Innovation continued. Consumers slowly returned. Confidence began rebuilding one small step at a time. The recovery didn't happen overnight. It happened gradually, almost invisibly. And that's another lesson history keeps teaching. Real wealth creation usually happens slowly enough that most people don't notice it until years later. Month after month, the stock market began recovering. Then year after year, the gains continued. The companies that survived the crisis became stronger. New technologies emerged. American businesses expanded. Productivity improved. Investors who had continued buying through their 401ks, IRAs, and low-cost index funds found themselves purchasing shares while prices were still deeply discounted. They weren't trying to predict the perfect bottom. Many of them didn't even realize they were buying during one of the best investing periods of their lifetime. They were simply following a habit. Keep investing. Keep working. Keep thinking long-term. Years later, that ordinary habit produced extraordinary results. This is one of the biggest misconceptions about millionaires in America. People often imagine dramatic success stories. Someone inventing a revolutionary product, a startup founder selling $1 billion company, an investor making one perfect trade. Those stories certainly exist, but they represent only a small fraction of wealthy Americans. Many millionaires were created much more quietly. A teacher contributing to a retirement account every month, a police officer investing consistently for 3 decades, a nurse who increased investments every time they received a raise, an engineer who chose ownership over lifestyle inflation. None of these decisions looked extraordinary in a single year, but over 20 or 30 years they became transformational. Because wealth is often less about making spectacular decisions, and more about avoiding destructive ones. This is where another behavioral bias begins influencing financial outcomes. It's called recency bias. Human beings naturally assume that whatever is happening today will continue tomorrow. When markets are falling, people begin believing they will always fall. When prices are rising rapidly, people believe they will never come down. Our brains struggle to separate temporary events from long-term trends. This is why investors often become optimistic near market peaks and fearful near market bottoms. Ironically, those are often the exact opposite moments that history rewards. The investors who benefited most after 2009 weren't fearless. They simply understood that temporary fear should not control permanent financial decisions. But this story isn't only about the past, because another enormous financial transition is already unfolding across America. One that many economists believe could reshape wealth for decades. It's called the Great Wealth Transfer. Over the next 20 to 25 years, tens of trillions of dollars are expected to move from baby boomers to younger generations. This isn't speculation. It's the natural result of demographics. Baby boomers spent decades accumulating homes, businesses, retirement accounts, investment portfolios, and other assets. Now those assets are gradually beginning to change hands. Many people hear this and immediately think, so the opportunity only exists if my family is wealthy. But that's missing the bigger picture, because large movements of capital affect far more than the families receiving inheritances. Money rarely sits still. When wealth changes ownership, it gets invested. Businesses receive new capital. Properties are bought and sold. Financial institutions expand. Investment firms grow. Entrepreneurs receive funding. Entire industries adjust to serve changing demand. In other words, economic activity increases. And throughout American history, periods of major capital movement have often created opportunities for people who were never direct recipients of that wealth. Think back to the decades following World War II. Millions of returning veterans purchased homes through the GI Bill. Communities expanded. Construction boomed. Manufacturing accelerated. Consumer spending increased. Entire industries grew because capital was flowing throughout the economy. The families who built wealth during that period didn't all receive government assistance directly. Many simply participated in an expanding economy. The same principle applies today. Whenever large amounts of money begin moving, opportunities appear in unexpected places. Financial planning, estate law, healthcare, construction, technology, artificial intelligence, cybersecurity, wealth management, real estate. Businesses that solve problems for a growing economy often benefit alongside the people creating that growth. But here's the hidden layer almost nobody talks about. The biggest opportunity may not be receiving wealth. It may be becoming valuable in an economy where wealth is constantly moving. Because money always follows value. If trillions of dollars are changing hands, people will need trusted advisors, skilled professionals, business owners, investment managers, tax specialists, financial educators, software developers, healthcare providers. The wealth transfer creates demand, and demand creates opportunity. This changes the question entirely. Instead of asking, will I inherit money? A better question becomes, how can I build skills and own assets in an economy where trillions of dollars are changing hands? That question puts you back in control. Because your financial future becomes less dependent on family circumstances and more dependent on preparation. History has never guaranteed equal starting points, but it has consistently rewarded people who recognize major economic shifts before the average person understands what is happening. And that's exactly what happened after 2009. Most people were focused on surviving the crisis. A smaller group quietly positioned themselves for the recovery. Today, history may not be repeating itself in exactly the same way, but it is offering another reminder that wealth is often created during periods of transition. The question is whether you'll recognize the transition while you're living through it, or only after it's already changed someone else's life. The biggest mistake people make when studying moments like 2009 is believing that the opportunity came from knowing exactly what would happen. It didn't. Nobody had a crystal ball. Nobody knew the exact day the market would stop falling. Nobody knew how quickly the American economy would recover. The people who benefited were not successful because they predicted the future perfectly. They benefited because they built a financial system that allowed them to participate when the future became better. And that difference is everything. Because most people are waiting for certainty before they take action. They say, I'll invest when the economy improves. I'll start building wealth when I earn more money. I'll take risks when everything feels safer. But throughout history, the safest moments are usually the moments when opportunities have already become obvious. By the time everyone feels comfortable, prices have often already changed. The people who built wealth after the 2008 crisis understood something important. You don't need to know exactly what tomorrow brings. You need to be prepared for the possibilities of tomorrow. That preparation begins with ownership. Because one of the biggest differences between wealthy households and struggling households is not always income. It is asset ownership. A paycheck pays you once. An asset has the potential to continue producing value. A company can generate profits. A rental property can generate income. A portfolio of investments can grow over decades. This is why ownership has played such a major role in American wealth creation. The families who built wealth during previous generations often did not become wealthy because they earned dramatically higher salaries. They became wealthy because they owned things that appreciated over time. A home purchased decades ago. A retirement account funded consistently. A business built slowly. A collection of investments held patiently. Small ownership decisions repeated over years became large financial outcomes. But ownership requires something many people struggle with: delayed gratification. And this is where modern life creates another challenge. American culture often rewards visible success: the expensive car, the luxury vacation, the bigger house, the lifestyle that communicates, I have made it. But wealth is often built quietly. The person driving an older car may have a larger investment portfolio. The person living in a modest home may have more financial freedom. The person who appears less successful may actually have more control over their future. Because wealth is not what people see. Wealth is what remains after your lifestyle is paid for. And this is why the next major wealth building period may reward people who think differently. People who understand that every dollar has a purpose. Some dollars are for today. They pay bills. They create experiences. They support your current life. But other dollars are seeds. They are planted for the future. They become investments. They become assets. They become opportunities. The challenge is that planting seeds requires patience. A person who invests today may not see dramatic results next month, or even next year. That is normal. Compounding is powerful because it works slowly at first. For years, it can feel like nothing significant is happening. Then eventually, growth begins building on previous growth. Time becomes the multiplier. This is why starting early matters so much. A 25-year-old investing consistently has a powerful advantage over someone starting decades later, even if both contribute the same amount of money. The first person gives their investments more time to grow, and time is one resource nobody can recover. So how can ordinary Americans position themselves for future wealth opportunities? The answer is not one secret investment. It is a collection of financial behaviors. First, build stability. Before taking advantage of opportunities, you need a foundation. Emergency savings, manageable debt, a realistic budget, financial breathing room. Because opportunities often appear during uncertainty, and people without financial flexibility are forced to make decisions based on desperation. Second, become an owner. Use tools available to ordinary Americans. Employer retirement plans, individual retirement accounts, diversified investments, business ownership. The goal is not to become wealthy overnight. The goal is to consistently own productive assets. Third, develop valuable skills. During every major economic transformation, some skills become more valuable than others. The people who benefit are often those who adapt. The internet created new industries. Technology transformed old industries. Artificial intelligence is already changing the way businesses operate. Future opportunities will belong to people who continue learning. Fourth, maintain a long-term perspective. The next crisis will come. The next market decline will happen. There will be another moment when people say, "This time is different." Sometimes challenges really are different, but the emotional reactions remain remarkably similar. Fear, panic, short-term thinking. The ability to stay rational during emotional moments is one of the most valuable financial skills anyone can develop. Because money decisions are rarely made with numbers alone. They are made with beliefs, with emotions, with identity, with expectations about the future. And understanding yourself may be just as important as understanding the market. Go back to the two Americans sitting at the kitchen table in 2009. They had the same information. They faced the same crisis. They experienced the same uncertainty, but they responded differently. One allowed fear to decide. The other allowed preparation to decide. Years later, their financial outcomes reflected those choices. Not because one person was lucky, not because one person knew the future, but because one person understood a principle that has repeated throughout American history. Periods of uncertainty often create opportunities for people who are prepared. The biggest financial transformations rarely announce themselves. They do not arrive with guaranteed outcomes. They do not come with perfect timing. They appear when the world feels uncertain, when people are questioning the future, when confidence is low, and that is exactly why they are so powerful. Because the same fear that pushes many people away can create opportunities for those who understand the bigger picture. The next generation of millionaires will not only be created by people who earn the most money, they will be created by people who understand money differently. People who choose ownership over appearance. People who choose patience over panic. People who understand that building wealth is not about avoiding every difficult moment. It is about being prepared when difficult moments create opportunities. The last time this happened, millions of Americans watched a crisis unfold. Some saw only destruction. Others recognized the beginning of a new chapter. Years later, history revealed the difference. The opportunity was not hidden. The information was available. The challenge was having the courage and discipline to act when doing nothing felt easier. And that may be the greatest financial lesson of all. You do not build wealth by waiting for the world to become perfectly predictable. You build wealth by preparing yourself for an unpredictable world, because the future will always bring uncertainty. But for those who understand ownership, patience, and human behavior, uncertainty is not only something to survive. Sometimes, it is where opportunity begins.